Gonna be trying to do some audio testing. Just a second. See if I can fix whatever crazy troubles we've had. See if we can do it. How does that come through? How does that come through? Not great. Let's see. How does that come through? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How does that come through? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Some weird feedback. Alright, some weird feedback. Good morning, Bitcoiners. Sun is up. I checked. Bitcoin's running. We can have our coffee. Talk about the news. So, the fakest news I saw yesterday, next level fake, was the US president tweeting with a graph of crude oil prices compared to retail gas prices. So that's the tweet. It's crude oil prices, retail gas prices, and you put a graph. And on the graph, you see crude oil prices go up, come down, and you see retail prices sort of dovetail, right? Small, tiny lags and deviations. And here's what President Biden says. It's simple. When the cost of oil comes down, we should see the price at the pump come down as well. That's how it should work. But right now, refiners and retailers are making record profits at the expense of the vast majority of Americans. It's unacceptable. So the tweeter that I'm following here, Aldous Huxley's Ghost. Aldous Huxley, of course, was the writer of Brave New World and the person who actually coined the name of the band The Doors for something he wrote called The Doors of Perception. And his whole world was looking at the immediate post-war American condition, US condition, British condition, and he was able to basically guess what the troubles would be now from a attention point of view, from a brainwashing point of view, from a manipulation point of view. And that's what makes his story, Brave New World, the, let's say, more accurate version of the 1984 vision for the future, right? The control over everything you do and say with the all-seeing eye, has some relevancy to the modern world. But the part they got wrong in 1984 was the scarcity of consumable items. The the story around Brave New World is there's no limit to what we consume, and there's drugs and orgies and orgy, consume, and basically given to every single desire you have, anything that you thirst or hunger for. It's all about instant satiation, instant gratification, and the kind of, let's say, confusion that comes with that. Let me just see if the audio is. How's everyone thinking about the audio? I tested it before I came on, but it's the same configuration that didn't work yesterday. So we'll see. So far, so good. So, but let me know in the comments if there's trouble. So Aldous Huxley's ghost here says so remember, the chart that the president released where he argued that basically the problem at the pump is the retailers kind of gouging you, right? They're kind of not in lockstep and dovetailing with the crude oil price, the unrefined price. And as I just described in the graph, if you're listening at home, again, they're the same. There's hardly any deviation between crude oil prices and price at the pump. There's slight day-to-day deviations because the scale of his chart only goes from May to October, so you can see a lot of lag, let's say. And as Aldous Huxley's ghost says, he's arguing here in the chart that the retailers are gouging you. But the chart is clear, they're not. So he's just saying words. People can think them or believe them or not, but the chart literally refutes what he's saying, and that's what Aldous Huxley's ghost here says. The president's chart refutes the president's statement. So here's the fake news part and why it's so interesting. Aldous Huxley goes on, the president of the United States has shown time and again he can say anything he wants with absolute impunity. The press will cover for him, and the epsilons will believe him in spite of direct factual evidence to the contrary. So in the Brave New World situation, everyone is almost genetically coded into a class based on materially induced fetal alcohol syndrome, basically. They basically give they put alcohol into the test tube glass containers where the children are born. The alphas, the best of the best, don't have any of that. They're birthed naturally from one female, and the others are all born in these factories and induced with the amount of alcohol into the womb that will determine their class going forward. So there's alpha, beta, and the epsilons, who are really just there to pick up your trash and do all kinds of stuff. So here, Aldous Huxley's ghost reminds us that basically the media is a complete failure, not even trying to do its job. They'll let the tweet go today or yesterday that is literally his words refute the graph, but no one is going to think about it. No one is going to ask about it. And it really just talks about the absolute rot that has set into American media in particular, because politicians wouldn't be able to do this had they not been trained like a dog to know that they can get rewarded for doing these things. But that's the good news. That's the good news. What we see all across, and that's sort of the point of today's show, we're going to talk about how to piss into the coming red wave, turn it orange, right? What does yellow and red make? Right? It's a beautiful color that we all love in Bitcoin, right? It makes orange. So how do we basically, and what is piss, right? It's our garbage. It's all of our problems. It's all of our issues from the body, right? You get rid of all the stuff you don't need. So how do we take advantage of the red wave that looks like it's coming? We're going to get into the red wave coming and what it means and where it's happening and how strategically it can dovetail with Bitcoiners' own ambitions. So let's start right away with one of the biggest red wave stories that's coming out of nowhere, that's surprising everybody, that's some of the biggest news, and I'll tie it to where I'm at right now, and I think we can start to see the future really quick. So I'm in New York City. I ran away from New York City during COVID. I'm a COVID refugee. People find it funny. It's kind of funny, but it's true. Like it was unlivable in the summer of 2020. And of course, life was good. I wasn't begging for entry into different countries and things like that, like typical refugees are. And I wasn't looking for public housing or anything like that. We just left, right? But nevertheless, we weren't able to stay where we had planned to stay, and I think that's the definition of a refugee. Whether people like to accept that New York can now produce refugees in World War III, rather than be rather than be the place they go for comfort and security, as they did in World War II, right? I always made the joke that I ran away from the Statue of Liberty as a refugee, the opposite of what's going on. But so here's and even just like here's how the lack of credibility in the media is so obvious, right? I'm here in New York City. You hear from right-wing conservative outlets like Fox and a lot of folks even on Twitter saying New York City is just a complete disaster. Everyone's at each other's throat all the time. It's so dangerous. What I saw was people in the past few days. I saw a city that's mostly recovered from COVID now. There's still a bit of uneasiness, but I saw people from all walks of life walking around, happy as can be, everyone enjoying the city. The energy is back. I compared the energy of New York City when COVID happened to the following, and it's a description I use for geniuses. Geniuses, why Michael Jackson turned out the way he did, and that's not uncommon, right? It's not uncommon. I read the autopsy on Michael Jackson the other day about his face and stuff. Wow, I mean, really sad to hear. But a doctor had gone and shared what was happening, and it's unreal. So the way I'd always explain that was from a book written by Elia Kazan, who was the guy who named names during McCarthyism. He was the director of On the Waterfront, Streetcar Named Desire, both the Broadway version and the film version. He's the guy who helped create Marlon Brando. He found him, Paul Newman, Warren Beatty, all these old actors from the old day. He brought the Russian method acting to America. And then basically acting is pre-Brando and Elia Kazan and post-Brando, Elia Kazan. James Dean comes from the same world. Like take a play written usually by Tennessee Williams, right? He was getting all the old Tennessee Williams plays. And he would take the Tennessee Williams plays, make a Broadway hit, find a young star who was a method actor from this one school, and then they would have a hit. So he was writing his biography, and he was describing what it was like to deal with Marlon Brando, Orson Welles, and all these people who were geniuses and then ended up in sometimes a really heavy state. Like, we don't fat shame ever on this show, right? We're all about helping people get over their health problems and all that kind of stuff, and especially mental health. And that's why Bitcoin and obesity are really related. So we talk about that a lot on the show. So we do not fat shame at all. It's all about moving time preference. It's not about discipline even, right? We're attacking the root of the problem here on this show. So we do not fat shame, right? Nobody chooses to be fat. We can accept that it is you have to have empathy, right? It is a thing that requires medical attention and help for people, right? So his explanation of Marlon Brando's weight gain was the following. Basically, people, geniuses, all the energy they had ends up working against them. What made them a genius kills them. And he compared it to a beach whale. That's what he found Marlon Brando and Orson Welles to be. And you can even think of Michael Jackson very easily as a beached whale, right? Everything that made them great kills them. And New York City felt like that during COVID. It felt like a city where everything that was great, and everyone if you've never been to New York City, let me tell you something about New York City. It's the energy. It comes out of the ground. It makes you feel like you can do anything. How many people come to New York City with a dream and a vision, and you just feel it in the air. There's something inspiring just about walking the streets and being here. There's that Jay-Z song, New York and da-da-da. That's accurate, as far as I can tell, right? In my own experience. Maybe it's not for everyone. But in COVID, the polarity flipped. And everything that was great about New York became the exact opposite. So all that energy was now dangerous, the opposite of inspiring, the opposite of making you think you could do anything. It was literally like, you probably can't go for a walk. And so it was that same thing as a genius, right? It was a beach whale. Being here now, people still try to describe it as that. I saw nothing of the sort, right? I saw a city waking up that is not even close to a civil war, as some people describe. And you can hear, this is from Zaid Jalani, and he talks about this, or maybe she, I'm not even sure, Zaid guy. One reason to not be surprised that voters don't think democracy is on the verge of ending is that democracy is not on the verge of ending. And I think that's right? The red wave that people are talking about, and I want to anchor it now in New York, right? I want to anchor it in New York. This is the big changes, right? Big changes. Here's what's going on in New York. So there's a governor race, and a fellow named Lee Zeldin, right, is running against Katie Hochul for the governorship after Cuomo and everything's gone. And it looks like it's a statistical tie. New York governor might flip Republican. It was never supposed to happen. It's all David and Goliath now. Everyone's talking David and Goliath. Can this happen? Well, let's start predicting maybe, right? Let's see this. Project Veritas yesterday. Now we only have about 2 or 3 weeks to go now, right? So here's just from yesterday. You've got Project Veritas with a sneak camera in the office of the New York City mayor, Eric Adams, who was kind of like a hero to crypto folks for a little while, and he was sort of signaling that he wanted attention and was going to make New York City the capital of crypto, and Miami would lose its position and New York would reassume it, and all this stuff. So, but in the end, nothing really happened. I even heard an anecdote yesterday speaking with the CEO of CoinDesk saying, that Eric Adams, the mayor, when he first took office, had everyone from the industry for some kind of roundtable, and everyone was moaning and complaining about Albany stuff, right? The New York Superintendent of Financial Services, the BitLicense stuff, and the mayor's sitting there, I can't do anything. The CEO of CoinDesk, when it was his turn, got up and said, well, look, I got a simple thing for you that you can do, which is get the city to do an event, right? Get Consensus, which is CoinDesk's big event, to move back to New York City. And he's like, I don't know. They wouldn't, that's literally all that's in his control, and he wouldn't do it, right? So already he was looking for easy wins and didn't really, now I'm not saying doing an event will make you a crypto capital or anything like that, but wasn't even interested, right? Doesn't understand what's happening, doesn't understand what's happening under the surface. So, but what he does have going for him is the following, and we can kind of understand why. So the camera was snuck in there. We find out from one of his team members, right, from his office, that basically the mayor doesn't give a shit about all these people that got fired for not adhering to the mandate, doesn't care, said he's corrupt. So the mayor is trying to tell this staffer that he's going to run for president next, right? And the staffer's like, no, you're done. You're corrupt. And he says right on the video, the mayor's got $2.5 million in the bank and several rental properties, and all he's ever been is a public servant. So he said he's way too corrupt. This is his own team member saying he's way too corrupt to go on to be president. Now, I don't know any about this. Is a hidden camera thing. It came out yesterday. Who knows what the staff member is on about? These are often honey traps. These things where he's on like basically a date. The fools that are giving all these quotes are on dates and spilling their guts and showing off and exaggerating and all that. So that's where this is entertainment as well, right? These hidden camera sting operations. But nevertheless, it's going to add to the chatter. It's going to add to the momentum. At the same time, you've got New York City, right? This is Eric Adams again. You've got New York City that declared a state of emergency last week because of the planes and buses of immigrants crossing the border down in Arizona and Texas, and then being sent to New York City, or Martha's Vineyard, if you remember the most famous example. So this has been going on for a while. So New York City declared a state of emergency about 2 weeks ago, and now yesterday, his office comes out with the following. They declared the state of emergency, then they unveiled a shelter yesterday for single adult men that has couches, TVs, Xboxes, 24/7 food and drink, and they came out to say that the meals are culturally appropriate. It is South American fare, he said. So they get South American fare, and this is from the Emergency Management Commissioner of Zach School. I don't have a problem with housing immigrants well when they come here. I'm not against that at all. Not against that at all. So I'm not trying to stoke any outrage over housing immigrants well. But it must be pointed out. It must be pointed out that New York has an incredible homeless problem with local New Yorkers. So why didn't they ever get one of these apartments with an Xbox and all that stuff? Now, I get, some of the homeless people, drugs, some can't be helped, right? Like, the drug problem is so bad in San Francisco and New York. My mind has already gone to, we've got to just create separate cities for these folks and manage their health problems, because just having them with the mental health needs that they have, we can't. It's two different people now, right? It's two different groups of people. As hard as that is to say, it's almost like a fork in the road, and you can't get off a lot of these drugs. Like, if you're a fentanyl addict, an opioid addict, discipline is not going to cut it, right? Discipline is not going to cut it. You need something else entirely. They're somewhat broken, right? These drugs are really bad. Like, they're not easy to overcome after. So we need entirely new ways to look at the healthcare around this stuff. And we're not going to find the answer to that today, but nevertheless, it's in the air. So it's another one of those stories where it can help move the 1 or 2% that's required for New York State to be part of this red wave. So we'll get to why red wave is important in a second. But this is happening. So David and Goliath now in New York, right? We see a David and Goliath in New York. Yesterday, Oregon came out. Oregon, of all places, Oregon came out. And it looks like that might be a toss-up as well. And here's a headline from Semaphore. And we'll talk about Semaphore in a second. It's a new news publication. It looks pretty interesting. We'll see. Democrats have run Oregon for decades. Their time may be running out. This is from yesterday. So Semaphore is a pretty interesting journalistic experiment. They took the founder of Quartz and old New York Times folks, and this is what they say. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. This is about Semaphore. In our increasingly interconnected world, journalism needs to deliver common facts to divergent audiences. Our biggest stories and greatest crises are global, from climate change to pandemics, rising inequality to supply chain disruption, political instability to the influence of social media. In response to those challenges, we're building a new kind of trusted news source for the interconnected world, based on journalistic transparency and a platform that delivers shared facts while giving voice to a range of informed, competing views. Now, I don't, a lot of gobbledygook, a lot of nonsense in there. But what it looks like is this is an honest attempt to bring the best of the old media characters, people, talent, skills, operations, and port them over to some semblance of a news service that will, basically not ignore the things that we've been talking about, like the Biden graph not complying at all with what he says and just being totally refuted by the stats. So it's full of New York Times folks, and what they're going for is this sort of new approach. So they're the ones who wrote this article. So that's why I want to bring it up. This is not Fox News trying to pump some candidate in Oregon that's a Republican. It's not that. This is what I think an interesting, middle of the road, trying to do their job journalist thing, trying their best to acknowledge that fake news exists, and they've got to find a way to get over the corporate pressures and all those filters that end up generating fake news. So we'll see. Semaphore says Oregon up for grabs. Let's go to Arizona. We've been talking about the Arizona race for governor. That looks like it would be impossible for Kari Lake to lose. She's so much more talented than the other person. She's one of the most, she could be president. I don't doubt it. She had a great thing with the media yesterday where this was awesome, just how clever she is. She's a former journalist. It's like a TV, just the read the news kind of journalist, not an opinion person, just like, today at 6, join us for the local thing in Phoenix, and we'll talk about cats in the shelter and what you're going to do for Halloween. So she was that kind of a journalist, right? Like a talk, look there as a journalist because she would look good, on top of a wedding cake, right? Like that's what they were, right? People who were on top of a wedding cake and you just put them and they read the news. That was the model. And that's what she was. So the local journalists, when she decided to run for governor, constantly said to her, wow, you have no experience. Come on, what are you doing? You're just the journalist. You can't run for office. You've never had a job other than read the news. So now this was one of the great comebacks she had. It's her voice even. It's so trained and eloquent and great. the journalist came in and said, what about all this stuff, you running for vice president and you're going to be on the ticket, and what do you think about it? And so she says, well, wait a minute here, guys. Wait a minute. You said I didn't even have the experience to run for governor, and now you're asking me about president and what I should say and what I should do and VP. Get with it. Neat that you're asking me about that question, but why do you still ask me and try to convince people that I have not enough talent and experience to do the job of governor, and now you're wondering if I'm going to get this promotion? So she says, look, I'm going to be here for 4 years, get used to it. It's going to be 8 years. I'm the governor. I'm going to win. Da, 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 da. Just great stuff, right? Great stuff. So we've got that governorship, but forget about that for a second. The Senate race there is the one that's important to Bitcoiners, and that's where we're going to start talking about how we're going to color this red wave, right, with our garbage, our yellow piss garbage, and turn it into an orange tide. How are we going to do it? So the Senate race in Arizona is between an astronaut, Mark Kelly, who basically now reads off the Democrat script. His brain was lobotomized and he was replaced with direction and basically top-down control is what I see. He sold or voted for water rights that would have been Arizonan by natural law, I guess, and who gets which water that goes between California and Arizona. So he ends up saying, voting to just let California have it. So Blake Masters had what I think is a kill shot, right? Like an actual kill shot on this guy from voting and appearance-wise, not obviously anything else. He said he's California's third senator, and it's caught on, right? So in America, every state has 2 senators. That's a way to maintain federal balance. So there's 100 senators in the country. Every state gets 2, no matter how big, how small. California gets 2. Vermont gets 2. Wyoming gets 2. Everyone gets 2. Not more than 2. Senior and a junior. And so he'll be the junior senator of California. So he argued that this other Arizonan was the third senator for California because basically the choice made no sense. To divert water to California when Arizona has even greater need is quite silly. And here's where Blake Masters starts. He's a total Bitcoiner, 100% Bitcoiner, came from the Peter Thiel, Thiel Capital, world where they definitely saw things differently. They definitely understand what's being financed, what's being built. He says straight out, the future is nuclear-powered desalination facilities along the Pacific coast for California. That means the more inland water, the one that was voted for California, should just by rights be Arizona's because they don't need to pump it all the way from the ocean. They can get it from there if California's getting it from there. So we got a real Bitcoiner who can take an important role. And now if we talk about the garbage part, right? Let's talk about the garbage part. How do we get the garbage out? Well, if all this change happens, right? If New York is caught up in the red wave, well, New York, right? The old administration made such a big fuss about kicking Bitcoin miners out, right? And that's our garbage. We have to deal with all this crap after. We set up all kinds of stuff in New York State because the welcome sign was out, lots of mines went up. I visited them, right? Where I live on the Quebec-Vermont border, on the Quebec side, you have the big Bitfarms mine. You used to have a lot more down into New York, but they put a moratorium on it, right? All that old industrial capacity for electricity, which is all buried in there, like all the industrial capacity of the old Rust Belt, where they're not manufacturing anything anymore, but the stuff is still in the ground, right? The capacity to move electricity from the dams and hydro dams and everything that were built up there to get the electricity to the mines is all still in place. It's just a simple matter of a bit of renovations to get it up and running. You don't have to build a new power plant a lot of the times. So this stuff made a lot of sense, and it was all suppressed, pushed down for optics and politics. And now it's the garbage we have to deal with, right? So when you have a change, the whipsaw of the change opens the door to all kinds of new opportunities. So suddenly, New York is on the table for us. And if we just look over to now, remember what this red wave can look like, right? So we talked about Blake Masters, nuclear energy. We talked about New York State, what can happen there. Let's go to Virginia real quick, right? Virginia, already in the future. They had their governor race the last time around. If you remember, the previous governor of Virginia, this was sad but crazy stuff. He was the Democrat governor who got caught in blackface and a KKK gown. Both, right? He wore a KKK gown in his high school yearbook, right? A KKK gown and blackface. But it was memory hold, right? Like with Justin Trudeau. Who cares? He's a Democrat. Like he said sorry. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fine. No big deal. Anyway, he lost. Right? This other guy came in, Glenn Youngkin. And what did Glenn Youngkin do yesterday? Glenn Youngkin, the beginning of this orange wave that we're anticipating, right? This is what Glenn Youngkin did yesterday. Glenn Youngkin opened America's first, let me get the actual thing here that I can read it to you. Glenn Youngkin yesterday opened America's first, where the heck is it? Anyway, I know what it is. He opened America's first small modular nuclear reactor, the same one that I talked about last week that Westinghouse put online in China. He has put online in America yesterday. So America has its first small modular nuclear reactor in a state that just underwent the same kind of change we're anticipating in Arizona, in Oregon maybe, and certainly in New York, which would be a huge, huge win. So right away, Virginia has this nuclear facility, all kinds of new energy capacity, and looking to use it, right? This thing has come online. It's supposed to be an example. The whole platform that Westinghouse came up with for these nuclear reactors is that they can be built on an assembly line in a factory, and they can be pushed out to their location and just turned on. It's amazing stuff. And the first one in America went online yesterday, part of a very similar move that we've seen for years now, where total change can happen in a very limited amount of time. And if you look at, I compared the Chinese situation, right? I compared the Chinese situation. China already has one. But here's a quote from, and then let's even just add a few more pieces to that puzzle. So you've got red wave coming in, right? We've got all of this stuff, these ongoing problems, this garbage that we have in New York State, that with a new candidate like this, everything's on the table. Everything's on the table because everything that went before is just bad, right? Everyone wants to get rid of what they just did before. So there's this opening when new administrations take over after years of one party being in power. And that's something I experienced years ago. When I worked for the Prime Minister of Canada when I was a law student, in the summer of 2006, Canada had an election change and a change of governing party for the first time in about 15 years. And when we came in, we had mandates to change everything. We did the cell phone spectrum auction to loosen up the competitive environment for cell phones, stuff that had been blocked forever. We tried to build 1 million pipelines. It didn't work out because of how long they took, but we got some done. Could have got more. But the point is, when governments change after such a long time, it just opens up the psychological space to introduce new ideas, and all resistance that might have been there at one time just suddenly evaporates, right? And it looks like we're going to get a blank slate in New York. And the reason it's important is, let's look at what else is breaking, right? You've got the pension funds in the UK now, right? Every pension fund and big institutional investor in the world has transformed itself into a shadow hedge fund, full of leverage and swaps to the whispers of the Wall Street worm tongue. And that's from the Epsilon Theory article from Ben Hunt that we read most of the pieces of last week. So this is still percolating through the system as the best frame to understand what's going on in UK, and I would recommend it to everyone, Epsilon Theory's UK pension plan explainer. And when you look at what's going on there, and you start seeing the Fed, right, the Federal Reserve, looking at what's going on in England, let out a signal yesterday that looks a little different. And this is from William Middlecoop, who is a great follow. And he says this is a sign. Fed's Evans, so one of the Fed presidents yesterday, says the Fed is facing a difficult messaging problem as it sits near a decision to halt the pace of rate increases. So, sounds like they're talking about one to slow the engine down, right? You've got energy industry that basically is just not in simpatico with Fed policy. You've got governments not agreeing with what the Fed is doing, right? And in the end, the only stable force are U.S. energy companies, and Middlecoop mentions that as sort of a add-on to what he's saying about Fed policy. His conclusion is we need to add to his American U.S. energy position, and then shares a chart of U.S. energy, right? So now, what I just mentioned in New York and Virginia and California, Arizona, right? American energy is about to change entirely, just like its politics. But I don't think its position of power and respect in America is going to change, right? Its problems of emitting greenhouse gases and all that are going to continue to influence what it does. But what's the greatest shaping force on the growth of the American energy system besides Bitcoin, right? We can literally, with this open-mindedness, with all the money that's going to go into US energy because it looks like the most stable industry in the world, right? It looks like no matter what way this thing goes, everything in Europe, I mean, we talk about it on the show a lot. Who cares who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? However it happened, American energy companies gave assurances to Europe that they would make up the difference, or to what extent they could make up the difference, right? And so the management of energy in America is suddenly the most important economic question. And so with these things all banding about, we have all of our troubles that we've had to deal with over the years as Bitcoiners, with the reputation attacks, with all of that stuff, right? About how we're part of the problem and all these things. But of course, anyone who studied incentive models and understands what Bitcoin can actually do to the grid knows that it's a totally different scenario, right? I'm not going to convince you in this audience here and in this group about that. We've all understood that there's a way for Bitcoin to power a clean energy revolution and to increase efficiencies across the grid that we've never even come close to approaching, right? It's an organizing force. It's an organizing principle that can help tie everything up. And that's really the problem in the end with the fiat system, is it's not an organizing principle. I often say, and this is I think a good frame that I always want to share with Bitcoiners. We use the word scarcity, right? We use the word scarcity because it helps understand what Bitcoin is, right? That these are scarce coins and that they are limited in effect. But remember, the formula is infinity over 21 million. The infinity means it's the whole world, right? There is no scarcity. It's a world of abundance. Bitcoin is good. I don't use the word scarcity. I use the word that it's countable. You can count it. That's it, right? Any number of Bitcoins were fine, right? 21 million, 22 million, didn't matter. That it's countable is all that matters, right? That it's countable and that we can always count it is what matters. I always use that on the show, the water analogy, right? You know, water was used to devise the metric system, right? It was arbitrary. They said 0 freezing, 100 boiling. Divide it up into equal parts, you've got a temperature system. Take that, and you can actually start creating volumetric measurements, which is where we get the kilometer from and the meter from, right? That's just the volume of water at a certain temperature and pressure, extended out mathematically to create distance. Now, the reason it works is because the properties of water don't change. You can count on them, right? You can count on Bitcoin. It's not going to change, which means you can count again. And you're not ending up with energy and nobody knows where it's going and it's being wasted and it's being used for this. And we have policies that are about feelings, not about delivering results. We have policies that are about scaring people, not about making them see a bright and beautiful future, right? That's what Bitcoin counting allows you to do. Seeing a bright and beautiful future becomes pretty easy, right? If you understand what Bitcoin can do. And that's why we love it, right? So much easier to put a Bitcoin filter on and imagine the future. So we've got the energy problem, and we've got you know, everything else that's going on with the bonds and global finance. And here's Jeff Booth, right, a great Bitcoin magazine contributor, talking about what can happen. Like, how quick could this be? And I've never seen it put so succinctly how quickly hyper-Bitcoinization can happen from now, from today, from a red wave coming, with all this energy kerfuffle, all this energy trouble, stress around it, but with American companies being at the top of the pile right now, American energy companies being at the top of the pile in the global economic system. This is what he says. He says the Fed tightening, right? They're talking about it, right? The Fed tightening and then going into Bitcoin in a big way would likely turn out to be the best strategic move in history, providing a path to a neutral reserve currency while concurrently promoting the free market and reducing the power of dictators over its citizens. So what that basically means is, if the Fed, right, if the Fed continues to have these policy initiatives downloaded by the government, right, the US government has policy initiatives and the Fed is now looking like it undertakes them, right? There's a way to imagine that they can play two games at once. They can maintain the global reserve currency by putting neutrality into that basket. At the same time, they can do what I've predicted. This formula, in the end, does what I've predicted for a long time. That the US dollar, right, the US dollar itself becomes an instrument of the very government forces that have tainted it for so long, but in a more positive way. And this is what it looks like. You know, they have tricked out consumer price index and the statistics and the numbers and all that stuff for so long. They've basically made the whole measurement of that stuff about the price of candy bars. Right? It's just consumption stuff. The consumer price index is really focused on the basket of consumable items. Nothing to do with the low time preference stuff. That's why they moved house ownership out of it and energy and all those things. It's just the consumer price stuff. I think they get what they asked for, right? We turn the US dollar into a policy dollar for consumption of candy bars or whatever. It's UBI. It's UBI. It's a type of policy buck attached to an instrument that allows American balance sheet and American policy to remain at the heart of the global reserve system, while also having a type of money that can be used to feed people, to take care of them, right? Talking about this mix. So that's what we got. That's what we got. We got all of our troubles, all of the troubles in the Bitcoin world. They don't want us. They don't want us. They make it troublesome for us. It's difficult there. California, New York, all the stuff, European energy. And we say, well, there's a red wave coming in, this time of complete change, you know, instability. And we take that opportunity to just put all our problems on these new governments. And I think the red wave does, as I said, it turns orange. It turns orange if we get this right, right? If we can do what's happening in Virginia, which looks like a template that a lot of states are going to have to follow anyway, right? These things are coming online. If we look at Virginia, all we got to do is inject Bitcoin into that formula, which is what I see happening out in Arizona with Blake Masters and what can easily happen in New York State. So that's the show for today. That's the show. Let's read some comments here. We got Justin. The simple fact that the US government doesn't want to pursue Bitcoin is proof positive that they don't care about spreading democracy. Well, is it proof positive? Look, you know, they're not smart. They're not smart. And I guess the best analogy that I have to explain what I saw in my time in DC and Ottawa and within governments and parliaments, it's kind of like this. And the 2000 US election, if you're too young to remember, was the perfect example because it's led to a lot of this trouble. The 2000 US election. So the 2000 US election was George Bush Jr. versus Al Gore. Now you got to imagine, you got to remember what America was like in the 90s. And if you weren't there, you're too young, you didn't know about it, here's what's going on. America was so far ahead of the rest of the world at this time because, you know, Russia, the Soviet Union collapsed, so the Cold War was over. And then the internet was invented at the same time. So as everyone is nostalgic about the 90s, we know that it was this great time of fun and everyone got along and no one even talked about politics. Politics were deemed the stupidest thing you could be interested in, and you shouldn't spend a minute of your time on it. And anyone who was a downer enough to talk about politics at a party was laughed at, right? Because everyone just got along and was like, what's the movie that you like now? Did you buy a CD or something? You know, I just bought a CD. There was no like Napster or anything like that. So in the 2000 election, the jokes on Saturday Night Live, and I remember them, were about how George Bush and Al Gore agreed on everything. And it was Will Ferrell playing George Bush and just saying, yeah, I agree with you. You know, I agree with you. Yeah, that's a good idea. I agree with you. So it's just these two guys agreeing on every single thing. And there was basically no attention to the election. There was no stress around it. Nobody cared. You could say, I'm voting for this guy, I'm voting for that guy. No one cared. I mean, it just was not on anyone's mind. And it went like that for the whole year. And it was more like a high school president competition. You know, we have student governments in American high schools a lot. So it almost turned into a high school popularity contest, not a policy contest, none of that stuff. It was the actual trappings of being such a successful society and being so far ahead of any potential problem. And what ends up happening, and this is what I noticed from then on, from then I observed this and was able to actually chart it back in sort of time and history and saw it continue forward. Basically this, that because nobody cared about it in the world, the only people that did care about it were in Washington, D.C., and they really cared about it. And in the end, it was all spin, and because no one cared about it, the lines between right and wrong, left and right, good and bad, whatever you want to call it, right? The lines of logic, the lines of what made sense, got so spun between themselves that it sort of spun away from reality. Like it just wasn't even close to what people on the outside world would even recognize as interesting, important, relevant. It was all spin. And then the internet came online and social media, and it basically just took that relationship, that estrangement from reality, and pushed it way further out. So that right and wrong counting, you know, like we talked about earlier, counting is like the thing that Bitcoin allows you to do, which is great. Because in DC there was no reference, there was no counting, there was no model that you were trying to. There was no goalposts. There was no North Star. It was power. And any way you needed to contort yourself to get there made sense, right? That was the logic. That was the organizing principle. So, you know, they're not thinking with facts. There's no logic in DC. There's no law. It's a groupthink situation on either side. And I wouldn't, if I was a lawyer trying to prove intent of these people, right? Like proof that they don't want to spread democracy, I would be incapable of doing so, I think. I can't mind read them. And in my opinion, they've just been spun so bad that they don't know up from down. It's disorienting. It's a psychological tumbler. And that's what it's like to go through these places. And it's hard for, look what's happened to Democrats. Imagine you were a Democrat staffer and that was your job, and you've been in DC since 2008 when Obama took over. Think about what you would have to do to yourself to hold the opinions you have now against the opinions you had then. You have to sort of light your conscience on fire, which means just ignore it, right? It's just ignored. It's not even around. And that's what we see. So it's a big disaster, right? So I don't know about, you know, I don't know what their intentions are. In my opinion, they're just dumb, you know, and that's why they got to be changed. Both parties, right? It's not one or the other. And so I know I argued a lot for red wave here stuff. It's not everyone who's coming in a red wave that's going to be useful. Blake Masters in Arizona, you know, even what we see in Virginia is not exactly what we need. I don't know how he's financing this nuclear reactor. I know Bitcoin's not involved. But going forward, right, the opportunity is there. The New York lobby is big enough to influence Albany, which is the capital of New York State. If you didn't know, it's not New York City. New York City is just a commercial city. There's no government here at all, other than the local mayor and the Fed Reserve. So Albany runs everything for this stuff, and the lobby that Bitcoin has created is strong enough to influence it in this state. And the amount of jobs coming from the miners, the amount of activity that's already here means, and the amount of financial activity that had to be turned down because of the last guys. Right, that's all available. So that's it. That's the show today, guys. That's how you piss into a red wave and make it orange tide. Right, that's how we do it. We get rid of our crap and we move on. Did I miss anything today, guys? There's some stuff on China. You know, we can probably talk about that tomorrow. It's not that interesting. Didn't fit in our theme for today. All right, team. That's all I got. We'll be back at the Vermont studio tomorrow for another episode of The Breakup. Thanks for coming, everyone. I really appreciate it. Huh? I have so much fun coming to do these shows every morning, and I really appreciate you guys for showing up. It's awesome. See you tomorrow, guys.